Breaking news once again, the underwater search vehicle Bluefin is scouring part of the floor of the southern Indian Ocean right now, searching for signs of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Vehicles like the Bluefin are one of the best tools in a deep-sea search. They were even used in the hunt for the Titanic. Here's CNN's Jean Casares.
If the search for Flight 370 seems like a mystery after almost 6 weeks of hunting in a vast stretch of ocean, think back to another ill-fated voyage, one that ended exactly 102 years ago. The Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912. It was the largest passenger ship in the world and cost the modern-day equivalent of $400 million. Park Stevenson served as the technical advisor to James Cameron, director of the blockbuster movie Titanic.
Really, Titanic was a well-built ship. She was manned by competent crews, and they were obeying all the rules of the time.
4 days later, the Titanic struck an iceberg, and its fate was sealed. More than 1,500 people perished. For almost 75 years, the sunken luxury liner remained on the seafloor. And the mystery grew of the Titanic, perpetuated by myths and theories. But in 1985, searchers finally realized why the wreckage had eluded them. The reported location of the ship's SOS transmission turned out to be wrong by 13 miles. The wreckage was finally found, split in half, resting over 12,000 feet below the ocean surface. Still, compared to the search for Flight 370, the Titanic expeditions were at an advantage.
In this case, we don't even have a reported distress position, and the ocean's just as deep here or deeper than it is at Titanic.
Much about the two efforts, says Stevenson, is similar, including the use of underwater search vehicles.
The most recent expedition to Titanic in 2010 used technology that's almost virtually identical to what they're using in the search for the Malaysian airliner today.
If the wreckage of the plane is found, the next step is analyzing it. A lesson learned from the Titanic is not to jump to conclusions.
There have been a lot of investigations on why Titanic sank. Was it a design flaw? Was the steel brittle? Were the rivets weak? They always try and point fingers at it. And if you look at each thing in isolation, you really can disprove it.
And the way to solve the mystery this time, he says, is the same.
If we can find the wreckage, as we did find the wreckage of Titanic, then we can reverse engineer and figure out what happened. As with Titanic, the wreck will have the last word.
Jean Casares, CNN, New York.
All right, Jean, we appreciate that. 102 years ago later, what happened to the mighty Titanic still fascinates people around the world. Joined now by Jules Jaffe. He is a research oceanographer with the Marine Physical Laboratory at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, the University of California, San Diego. He was part of the team that found Titanic at the bottom of the North Atlantic. Thank you for joining us, Jules. You were involved in that search for the Titanic. Do you think investigators are going about this search for Flight 370 in the right manner?
Thanks for inviting me, Don. First of all, yes, I think so. I mean, Titanic did not have a pinger on it that we could listen and be guaranteed within a few miles of the wreck in order to know where it was. And given the fact that this is a sort of standard search procedure that the U.S. Navy uses for its, military planes and things like that, I really can't see any other options.
So you think they're searching in the right area, Jules?
Well, if they heard the pinger, the answer is yes. I mean, I spent a bit of time looking into the specifications of the manufacturer of the pinger. And they say, well, you can hear us within 2 miles. And then you go to the manufacturer of the towed pinger locator. And they say, we can hear a pinger within 2 miles. And then you realize you're in 2.5 miles towing a pinger locator at almost a mile down. So you got to be within a couple of miles of that, of the pinger in order to locate it. Now the question is the wreck near the pinger locator? Certainly the box is there. And so, yeah, I think we're within a couple of miles. That 2.5-hour transmission that they received seems like really good news in terms of trying to locate this thing.
All right, let's talk about Flight 447, a similar an air incident. Let's take a look at 2 pictures from Air France 447. This is a look at the debris field, and this is a clear picture of the engine on the ocean floor. Can we eventually expect the same type of pictures when 370 is found?
Yeah, so that's a great, question. I think one thing that an oceanographer will tell you, like myself, is the ocean could be different anywhere. But I think the global feeling is that the deep ocean is actually very clear. All the stuff we see that comes down somehow gets remineralized by the organisms in the ocean. And our experience is pretty much that the deep ocean is pretty clear. It would certainly be easy for the teams that are out there to figure out how clear the ocean is. And given that scenario, I think very much so. Given the camera systems, we should be able to see optical images just like the ones that you are seeing now from 447.
That was my next question. Can the bluefin give images similar to those from 447?
I do believe that there's not a big difference between the bluefin and the remises. And so given the scenario that the bluefin does have a camera and lights on it, there's no reason why it can't.
Why it shouldn't. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the bluefin. It's creating a map of the ocean floor. Is it possible that the wreckage could be mistaken for boulders or possibly rolling hills?
Yeah, so this is a great question, which again challenges our knowledge of the environment. Now, as you probably know from the stories we've been hearing and learning, we're using an acoustic system. That means we send a sound out and it reflects off the seafloor and we listen to the reflection. And then by compositing successive reflections, we create an image. Now, we know that these are rolling hills, and that's actually the best news I've heard all week. And the other thing is there's a lot of silt down there.
Why is that the best news? Why is that the best news that you've heard all week?
Because the rolling hills, you'd be much better, you'd be much worse off if you were in canyons and valleys, and if you had sort of all kinds of crevices and big boulders around. So rolling hills is not a bad place for a sonar. It's a matter of figure and ground. We want to see the figure from the ground, and if it's just rolling hills, and if the actual sediment is absorbing the sound to some extent, things that are sitting on top of it, reflective things like man-made components of jets and other metallic objects, in principle, should give us some specular reflections which would allow us to see the difference between the man-made objects and the rolling hills.
Do you think that we may see some manned underwater vehicles go down at some point? That would be if, I would imagine, the Bluefin 21 doesn't locate anything.
Personally, from all that I've known in doing oceanography now for 30 years, I think the worst thing to do would be to send a manned vehicle down. I think everything we've learned is that, if you look at the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, they were actually able to fix that with what we call an ROV, a remote operational vehicle. We have lots of experience with deploying remote operational vehicles that will have tools on them, that can cut, that can hold wrenches, that can do things, that can certainly bring black boxes up, and they can work 24/7. If you're in Alvin, you don't have that much time on the bottom. You're much better off with these remote tools, in my estimation.
Because there's not enough time in a manned vehicle, right? You believe, submersible?
Yeah, as I described to Carol Costello last week, it's when I first started working with Ballard 30 years ago, what he said, it's a long elevator ride down, you got 3 or 4 hours on target, and it's a long elevator ride back up.
Right.
The great thing about these remote vehicles is they're 24/7. I mean, 24, let's say it comes back, we'll maintenance it 6 hours later, it does another 24 hours.
Yeah. I want to ask
you can't do that in a manned vehicle.
I want to ask you another question about Titanic since you helped, but just quickly, do you think that they will find 370?
Absolutely. I mean, I think so. I really do. I really think they're going to find it. I think we have a good locus for it. I think the sonar pinger was giving us a good radius of search, and I can't imagine that all this debris is not going to light up a sonar. So I think in the next week, hopefully we will find it.
Okay. Ultimately, though, the bulk of the Titanic wreckage was left in its final resting place on the ocean floor. Do you think that the more time passes, the more likely that the same choice could be made about 370?
Well, there was a huge commercial interest in bringing the Titanic back. I mean, people had dreamed of, having amusement parks with Titanic sitting in it. It's really hard to bring back stuff, big things from the ocean, the bottom of the ocean. And I think that a good visual survey over a period of maybe a week or two would give us a lot of information coupled with the flight recorders to really make some conclusions about what happened.
Jules Jaffe, fascinating. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, when we come right back, a top Malaysian government official makes a rather eye-opening statement about who should control the black boxes if they are found. I'll ask my team of experts about it.